One.
The China COVID infection soaring.
Lockdowns, quarantines, business shutdowns.
WHO is very concerned over the evolving situation in China.
The wave of protests that swept across China over its draconian COVID restrictions have pushed Chinese leadership to act. The country is beginning to lift its more stringent COVID rules after nearly 3 years in isolation. But what could mark the end of zero COVID may just be the beginning of China's pandemic problems.
Crunch time starts about a month from now. Infection will be building, but the Spring Festival is the equivalent of Christmas in China. This year it starts on January 21st.
And in the next couple of weeks, China will be faced with unprecedented pressure to the health system.
You're going to see COVID zero past us. You're going to see at least this wave of COVID past us, and you're going to see a reactivation of the economy. But I think people have been way too optimistic on how fast this can happen.
Are now starting to swiftly shed their rigid restrictions. Citizens are no longer required to provide a negative COVID test and health code check when traveling domestically. The government is also allowing more people with mild cases to quarantine at home, a departure from the massive quarantine facilities with thousands of beds.
The Chinese government wants to preserve face for the zero COVID policy.
China is battling a surge in COVID cases, and new media reports could reveal the vast scale of the outbreak. Bloomberg and the Financial Times have reported around 250 million people were infected during the first weeks of December, citing a leaked.
China is reeling from a wave of COVID-19 infections. Hospitals are overflowing with coronavirus cases now that the country's abandoned its strict zero COVID policies it had upheld for so long. Medical authorities say the current wave will keep worsening into next week. For those still healthy, the rule is
document. But Chinese authorities appear to be downplaying the severity of the current wave. Despite the surging cases, they're continuing to report no new deaths, even as hospitals and morgues fill up. The death of an 84-year-old Beijing resident waiting for hours to be admitted into a hospital on December 20, 2022, has laid bare a medical crisis in China. The country has been struggling to cope with a surge in COVID-19 infections since restriction.
Well, China is battling a surge in COVID cases, and new media reports could reveal the vast scale of the outbreak. Bloomberg and the Financial Times have reported around 250 million people were infected during the first weeks of December, citing a leaked government document. But Chinese authorities appear to be downplaying the severity of the current wave. Despite the surging cases, they are continuing to report no new deaths.
What's puzzling now is how accurate these figures are, no matter the actual infection numbers and the death numbers. And we know that the death definition from China is very different from the WHO definition. They restricted to only for pulmonary.
China is on the brink of a COVID-19 storm, possibly the largest since the pandemic began 3 years ago. According to research firm Airfinity, it is estimated that the country is experiencing at least 1 million infections and 5,000 deaths.
I think I said that yesterday maybe they can use their technology like apps. A lot of their communities have access to apps, WeChat. They can use that to teach people how to triage if they have mild symptoms or relatively asymptomatic, stay at home and wait for recovery. If they have vulnerable people, instruct them how to get to the hospital. So I think triaging is the key. And the second is try to be more open up in terms of the new mRNA vaccines.
Every day, the country's abrupt U-turn in its zero-COVID policy has caught the healthcare system unprepared, and now, medical workers are bracing for a battle. Fever is plaguing many people, and cities giving out millions of ibuprofen pills too.
Live streamed around the world as protests erupted at an iPhone factory in China. It's thought workers there are fed up with COVID lockdowns and factory conditions. Problems there have already led to iPhone shortages here in the UK.